Well, Halloween's getting closer and closer. I'm still waiting on that one package, but I guess while I'm waiting in the meantime, I guess I should just talk about one of my favorite movies that I've actually watched every Halloween. And by the name of the title, you can probably tell I'm talking about Monster House. If you're probably wondering, what's Monster House? Well, it's a film made in 2006 and was written by Rob Straub, sorry if I got that name wrong, Pamela Petler, and the infamous Dan Harmon, and was also the directorial debut of Gil Kenan, who also directed films like Poltergeist, the Scream TV series, and he's also a writer for the upcoming Ghostbusters Afterlife movie. The movie was also produced by Columbia Pictures, Relativity, Image Movers, and Amblin Entertainment, telling the story of three kids, DJ, played by Mitchell Musso, Chowder, played by Sam Lerner, and Jenny, played by Spencer Locke, who discover that the house across the street is actually alive and plans to eat unexpected trick-or-treaters on Halloween night unless DJ and friends find a way to slay this real estate nightmare. Even too many cooks in the kitchen, what I mean being that there are 3 writers, 4 studios producing this entire project, a lot of people generally think this film would kind of flop. Not to mention it isn't by that one studio who also gave us Mars Needs Moms, and people thinking this was the future of film? Oh boy, were they wrong. Surprisingly enough, the film was a moderate success, making $141 million from its budget of $75 million, and was even nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, though it lost to Happy Feet, but that's kind of understandable. And over the years, the film has been regarded as a cult classic film during the Halloween season. It's usually the case with a lot of these films over the years. So instead, let's talk about the video game. Yep, this isn't a movie review, this is a video game review. And of course, it's Monster House the video game, and I'll be playing the PlayStation 2 version. The game released on July 18th of 2006, 3 days before the actual film, which released in July 21st of 2006. And when it comes to licensed video games, no one was the king of publishers than THQ. Though the game was actually developed by Artificial Mind and Movement, aka A2M. Ass to Mouth, eventually becoming now Behavior Interactive because, no joke, they fear people would confuse them for Ass to Mouth. That is genuinely hilarious. When it comes to A2M, they've actually helped publish quite a few licensed games, from Bugs and Taz, Ed and Nettie, and other ones that people can either consider pretty good or pretty bad. Not to mention, they've also developed games like Naughty Bear, Dante's Inferno, and the current Dead by Daylight, which I really need to play, but I don't have any friends to play it with. Oh well, I guess we should probably continue talking about the game. The game begins by briefly going through the beginning of the film, and you start the game inside the house, which actually is like halfway through the film. DJ, Jenny, and Chowder actually get separated and must find their way towards the heart of the house and put out its flame. So you navigate through the monster house as one of the 3 characters, depending on which situation you're in, or what's convenient for the story of the game. So when you're making a game about traversing inside a literal monster house, how would you make a game like that work? So this is the interesting part. Monster House plays like Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 4. What I mean is, you actually navigate through this entire mansion-like structure, somewhat similar to the Spencer Mansion from Resident Evil 1, and it's a third-person shooter like Resident Evil 4. Except it's more kid-friendly, because we're not putting guns in here, they actually have squirt guns. So you're probably wondering, if it's a third-person shooter, what kind of adversaries do you have to deal with inside this game? You actually fight the monster house itself, in a way. More like the furniture that's inside the house. You fight the floorboards, you fight evil chairs, the steam machines are fairly the most annoying enemy in the game, lamps, pipes, and a demonic version of the television from Courage the Cowardly Dog. I heard TV's bad for you, but this is ridiculous. What's also more ridiculous is your main weapon of choice is literally a water squirter for all 3 of the kids. Though, funnily enough, their shooting styles are fairly different. By pressing the X button, you automatically shoot water. The O button is very useful for lock-on abilities. You do run out of water, so you have to press the triangle button repeatedly to refill your water. L1's for ducking, R1's for melee attacks. It's a great keep-me-off tool. And the square button is a special attack depending on the characters, which I'll actually talk about their differences in gameplay. Of course, starting the game off, you actually play as DJ, who is the most balanced of the characters out of all of them. He squirts a fairly good amount of water, and he loses a good amount of water. And for his special item, he actually wields a camera so he can stun enemies. They don't really have eyes, so I don't know how that works. The other character you get is Jenny, who has a rapid fire water squirter, which uses less water but doesn't do much damage. However, her special item, the slingshot, actually does more damage than her water squirter. It insta-kill lamps, and it also breaks locks on doors. This is the only time this is ever useful. And lastly, my least favorite in the gameplay variety is Chowder. I know he's a bumbling buffoon in the game, but surprisingly he actually has like a shotgun water gun, which could actually two-shot or even one-shot some enemies. But it uses a lot of water, and his special item is a water balloon bomb, which actually can kill multiple enemies in one shot. Fairly useful when you're in certain situations where there's a lot of enemies. But what's weird about it is the aiming in this one is super wonky, even if you use the lock-on ability. There's also a bonus button that you get halfway through the game as you find the police car and you find a walkie-talkie, and you actually get to communicate with Skull. Funnily enough, I actually forgot this ability halfway through the game, because honestly, Skull's no help whatsoever. He just has one-liners that are fairly useless. But honestly, he's just more there for like an Easter egg purposes, I guess. You know, to make sure this is an interconnected license game. Which is kind of interesting considering none of the cast is actually voiced by any of the actors in the movie. I mean, Mitchell Musto, that's kind of understandable. He's eventually going to be on Hannah Montana. The game itself does also have some pretty interesting puzzle layouts, and honestly, a very creepy motif going on. I actually got scared a couple of times through the gameplay. But that doesn't mean the game is perfect. I actually ran into some glitches, and I don't know why. It was mostly from Chowder, which was why he was my least favorite to play as. I don't know why, but Chowder's gameplay always has the most glitches that I've found. I accidentally got an enemy trapped in a certain area, and I couldn't damage him, so I had to die and respawn at the last checkpoint, only for a different enemy not to respawn, so I got stuck, so I had to quit the game, go back to my last save point to progress, and then I managed to move on to the next level. And this wasn't the only time. In Chapter 6, this game is actually chapter structure, which still doesn't make sense. When entering a new area, I got stuck in a loading lock, so I had to restart the PS2 just to continue playing. Luckily, it saved right where it was, so it wasn't that bad, but I don't know if it's also noticeable in any of the other releases, like the GameCube, the Xbox, and apparently the Nintendo DS. Back to the game, it has a lot of variety when it comes to the challenges you have to deal with, though it is copy-paste with different enemies. Like I said before, the actual floor, the chairs, the lamps. Also, there was also this giant furnace monster, and weirdly enough, only one boss inside the entire monster house, which is a stuffed version of a certain character I'll go into more detail later, and covered by a chandelier. The game itself is fairly linear, with some interconnected paths that'll lead you to some collectibles. One of the first is actually these toy monkeys, which is actually shown in the movie, as well as Toy Story 3, you know, that really creepy one. There are actually 32 in total in the game, and I actually managed to find 26 of them. And finding a certain amount will actually unlock certain concept arts for the game, such as backgrounds and even designs of the monsters, which, in all honesty, look fairly creepy. I bet you that in more modern hardware, this would actually have been a really scary game. I actually did get a few chills from actual gameplay. Not to mention, you can also find these arcade tokens where you can actually play a game called Thou Art Dead. It was actually an arcade game that was in the Monster House movie. You can find quite a lot of these tokens all over the area, but in order to get them, you have to do a lot of property damage, and that pisses off the house a lot, and that could sometimes lead to also spawning of enemies. So it's a major risk-reward situation, but I'm sure you can handle it knowing what you're doing. I guess one of my biggest gripes with the game is the fact that you do switch between the characters too often, but it's kind of understandable considering the game lasts roughly 2 to 3 hours, depending on your skill level. Personally myself, I would have actually loved a 3 different story structure where you play as either DJ for the entire playthrough, Jenny through the entire playthrough, and Chowder through the entire playthrough. Since the kids fairly played the same with the button mechanics, I can see why they went with this type of structure. Now, I'm going to be going over some spoilers of the movie as well as the game, so if you don't want to see the spoilers, I'll give my opinions right over here, so you don't have to be spoiled the entire game. After making it to the demonic basement of Carnival Town, DJ, Jenny, and Chowder actually finally reunite and actually find Constance, Nebbercracker's wife, in a concrete prison. And a crack above the wall shows them what actually happened to her, because, you know, Nebbercracker isn't really in the story to actually explain the plot, so they had to find a way to put that into the movie. Which, by the way, this also technically spoils the movie in a way. I get that it's a licensed game and some have to actually use the same plot as the actual movie, because, you know, writing original stories is kind of hard. So the gang decided to finally put the house to rest, only for the house to get very pissed off at them and scatter them yet again, and must find a way to the main hall to escape. Jenny grabs onto the uvula, they get flown out of the house. Constance actually uses the trees around it as hands and then starts chasing our main characters. The final boss has two different types of phases. The first is the chase scene around the neighborhood, dodging obstacles via QuickTime events, and they can be a little tricky at times, though funnily enough there's this one cutscene moment I actually messed up on, which I find very hilarious. After surviving and making it to the construction site, I actually gain control of a giant crane. And it becomes a first-person fighting game like Punch-Out, only with one arm, or I guess one crane in this situation, where I have to try tearing down the house before it can take down me. Another QuickTime event happens, reenacting the dynamite scene from the film, and after the house explodes, the game ends. Kind of a disappointing ending if you ask me. I mean, the game does spoil the film's massive plot twist near the end of the game, but considering that the licensed game is of an upcoming film at the time, it is an alternative way to actually see the film. Though interestingly enough, there's actually no cutscenes in the film whatsoever. A lot of the cutscenes are usually in the in-game engine. But now I guess it's time to talk about my thoughts on this game. Considering that now Monster House is a cult classic film played every Halloween, is the game as good as the film? Surprisingly, yes. The game itself is fairly short, and trying to find everything won't take long. You're still rewarded with a bonus game of Thou Art Dead if you find a lot of tokens, so that can kill a lot of time, especially since it has that arcade level of difficulty. And Monster House is a decent third-person shooter for kids that actually got a good couple of scares out of me. Though I will generally say there are some moments where I had a hard time controlling the kids, especially when one of the enemies is right behind me and I have a hard time turning around and I get damaged. Or there was this one scene where I actually entered a room and one of the creatures actually hit me. And of course, the glitches I found in Chowder's gameplay, but that could have just been my disc. Monster House, the game itself, is just like the film. It's a hidden gem of entertainment and is pretty good time waster. And a game I recommend you can play during Halloween, like maybe for a live stream. I mean, it was much better than any of the Casper games I played, that's for certain. Alright, and that does it for another Halloween video. If you like what you saw, just like and subscribe, and please ring the bell for notifications. Until next time, guys, happy Hallow... Oh, is that my package? Ooh, please be, please be. Yes! And tune in next time as I talk about the last video I'll do for Halloween, about two certain scared dogs.